So we're here with the presence of various members of the council. Claudia Turbot is one of them. We're building bridges with the organizations in several parts of the country. So Claudia Turbot Default is going to be the first one, and then we'll give the floor to the senators. Thank you so much, Juan Pablo. It's a great opportunity. I want to thank you. It's great to be here. We're part of Wiphalas for the World, Wiphalas por el Mundo. We're an international campaigns in Europe, United States, Australia, and South America and Bolivia. We're united in resisting against those fascist governments. We're united. So I'm grateful for this space to thank everyone and to welcome all the panelists we have today. It's really important to say that in Bolivia there was a fraud, but it was the State Organization of the Americas. So thank you so much to the Progressive International to help the Bolivian people with the international missions. So we've been supporting Evo for all this time to go back to democracy. So we're gonna keep on working together. So thank you so much. We're happy to be here. Thank you, Juan Pablo. Thank you, Claudia. So in our list, we know that the first person, so Andrés Arauz, he's part of he's from Ecuador, but he was part of the Rafael Correa government. He's been a vice minister on the planning ministry. He's been a part of a central bank. He's part of a council of the international of the Progressive International. He's an investigator. He's been working with the Claxo, Central Bank of Ecuador. He's been working with the Michigan University on public policies. He has a great work on economical recovery. So he's going to be a presidential candidate for 2021 in Ecuador with the UNES Hope Alliance. It's an honor having you here today. Please, we'll leave you the floor. Thank you so much. Thank you, Juan Pablo. Thank Claudia, and to everybody here in the panel. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. I was also I've been part of the Progressive International, working so that we can have that great session of work. We know that because of the pandemic, we need to change the plan and we need to have that virtual meeting. So we've been. I'm proud to be the candidate for my country that I see as an opportunity to.
I want to do everything possible for our planet and for our region. I'd like to talk about some topics that
I'd like to work on a few topics that I had in mind.
Maybe I should start with some concepts that are linked to democracy in Latin America, and maybe one of the lessons that we've learned here in Latin America is that when we really have a democracy, they always fight against the popular and the democratic option. If it talks about if it comes to fraud, for example, and when they want to inhibit a real democracy, that's when we see other things happening. So we think it's fundamental, that it's really important that we have democracies, real democracies here in our region that really construct equality for all our population. I think in Latin America, the there's a technical problem with Andrew's presentation. We will have a look whether we can recuperate it, and we will wait a bit. Sorry, we are very sorry for the inconvenience. That has to do with internet connection. Andres is telling me that he doesn't have internet connection. So maybe we will continue with another panelist so that we can continue with the discussion. And while we wait for Andres, we will continue with another panelist, which is already here, which is one of the political thinkers that are most important from Colombia. Here is Gustavo Petro, which is one of our big friends here. He's a very important political thinker. But Andres, do you have good connection? Yeah, I'm connected again. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. Okay, if you have a good connection, we can continue with you. Andres, can you hear us? Okay. So we are really sorry for the technical problems. As I've just told you, in order for Andres to solve his problem, his connection problem, what I suggest is that we continue with the next speaker. So we will continue with the next speaker, Gustavo Petro. We're very sorry, but now it will be your chance to talk. I hope you're prepared, that you have a good connection, and I'm very grateful that you're here. For us, it's an honor that you can be here. You're a politician, and you started very young, and he's a former militant of the M19 movement in Colombia. He's senator, and he's very well known for his capacity to talk, and for his investigations, and also the crimes in Colombia that he has talked about. He has a political program that has to do with fighting against discrimination, against climate change. So it's very, very important topics that he's talking about internationally in Colombia. He's the progressive candidate for Colombia. and currently he is senator. He is in the leadership of the movement Colombia Humana. He's also part of the movement, the Progressive International, and he's pre-candidate for the and runs for president in the Colombian elections. Thank you for being here, Gustavo. Thank you very much, Juan Pablo, Claudia, and I want to thank everyone who's been in the organization. This meeting of the Progressive International, which is a process of political organization, a global process of political organization. This movement was generated basing itself on labor fights. And the idea is also to fight the international organization of the extreme right. So the question is, why should we have this type of global organization? Which is the sense that we can give to that organization, or the meaning that we can give to it within this context. What we felt or what we've missed in humanity is something very central, and that we haven't seen a lot in conventional politics, which is the climate change. So a global organization that has to do with the climate change is very important. This type of fight, we can't have that type of fight on a local level, but it has to be a global level. So I would like to talk about this topic. I don't want to talk about the scientific reasons. I won't explain what's climate change. But what's important to know is that our principal and most pressing problem in the world. Even the Pope and also some political leaders have told us and have actually shouted to us that the climate change could eliminate us from the planet. It could be a new genocide, and it could mean the ultimate phase of life, the extinction of the human race. Climate change isn't a natural phenomenon. For the ones who don't know that much about the topic, the climate change has to do with the market and the expansion of the market. And the expansion of the market has a certain logic and a certain form of production, a certain way of production, of distribute and to consume, which is capitalism and the capital. It's capital which produces the climate change. And as the logic of capital is an expensive logic, like a storm, and it seeks its affirmation by expanding itself, and it means moving production and consumption like a storm that gets bigger and bigger and also more intense. So it does not only touch upon the productive sphere, but it also penetrates all human activity. And it's also try to control nature. Capital is fossil capital, which means that prime energy forces are oil, gas. These these fossil fuels that are used in processes the production generate a lot of gases, and this is something that we've preserved during a lot of time, but now it's changing, and it's changing globally in big volumes. And that's what we call climate change. There are visible effects that we can see in all the world, which are the less dangerous ones, and then they're the ones that we can't see, but they're more dangerous actually. One example is the transformation of bacteria that were living with us with other species, and these bacteria and virus are being transformed. COVID doesn't actually have a root in the climate change, but it has to do with it. So if the climate change expands, we will find more viruses, for example. And this reality to be very close to the end of the world, what does that change, and how does that feel? Because that's something that we've never lived consciously. So the climate change produces political effects. We have a lot of recipes to a certain extent. We have a lot of technology which tries to avoid oil and gas, for example. It sounds very, very easy. There are a lot of recipes, there are a lot of manuals, and they talk about transport, for example, and talk about the use of energy. They want to use clean energy, avoid eating meat, and change how we live in cities. These are just some examples, but all these recipes and manuals have implied changing capital logic, imply that the market can't extend itself even more. It also implies that we have to plan in order to change energy use, transport. And it seems that talking about a plan after 4 decades, when we were used to the market making the plans and linking the welfare to the market, how do we now talk about a plan? In Colombia, they call us Castro Chavistas if we talk about that. But if we want to live, we have to do all of that. We have to change the logic of capital. We have to think about forms of production which focus on relation between human beings, and we have to consume differently as well. And this is something that the people in power don't like. And what they can do is change have tubes instead of buses, have solar panels instead of other types of energy. Here in Latin America, we've exported many resources and many fossil fuels. And here we ask ourselves, if we don't do that, what will we do? Well, we have to change this model of development, which is based on extraction and exploitation. And the production implies rational use of water and of soil, and that's something that we haven't done in many years. It also means asking us, what do we produce and why and for whom? And in whatever part of the world, we all should have this idea. We should have new forms of production. We should relate in another way to within societies. And all of this is a problem for power, for global power. Overall, for private power, who would like to maintain everything as it is at the moment. For example, current production forms, and in the production of cars, for example, they would also like to maintain the financial system and all the forms that have a lot of power within the fossil economy. So they resist to a certain extent, and within this resistance, they also have many ideas and suggestions. There's a lot of negation. There are millions of people nowadays that have to leave their houses because they don't have water, because they don't have any perspective given this context of climate change. And they have to go to the north where they can find fertile soil. So it's a political confrontation between barbarism, which is already there and which will turn more intense. They call it strong capitalism, which is a certain form of producing, of consumption, of making profit. And on the other side, we have humanity. So it's an antagonism between these two, between the expansion of market, which is linked to profit rate, and life. And this is a very, very strong conflict, because if we want to live on the planet, we have to recuperate the market. We have to reclaim the market. We have to limit it, because it's the market which causes death. And it's a type of fighting, of political fighting, where we can't win if this fight isn't global. We can't globally solve this problem. So the globalization of fighting, of political fighting, this is something that you can see very, very clearly nowadays, that it's important. And it's a globalization of a fight for life. It's not a diplomatic meeting. It doesn't have to do anything with political bureaucracy. But it's the coordination of all humanity that wants to fight for life. And this implies that there have to be changes in powers and power structures, globally and locally. We have to change how we produce. We have to change how we consume. We have to change how we construct relations. And this is a global task. Juan Pablo, do I still have time left? Yes, you still have time left. You can continue, please. So these tendencies of barbarism, there are a lot of famous personalities: Trump, Bolsonaro, in my case, Duque, you're in Europe. So there's a lot of neo-fascism in Europe as well. There's also a lot of racism, of xenophobia, and there's a lot of hate against migrants, against strangers. There's a lot of supremacy, white supremacy, and these ideas are also extending themselves. So against all the communities, Afro communities, for example, communities in Latin America, in Asia, they want to control them. And it's a control of humanity as well. And it's a very fascist control. It's also very violent control. the construction of the wall in Mexico, for example. Also, what happens in Greece and refugee camps, which are actually concentration camps. The border between Mexico and the United States, they're concentration camps for children who have to separate themselves from their families, and there are thousands of them. And where we can see the word democracy coming up for the first time is when they destroy democracy. And actually in the Mediterranean is where we destroy democracy and we will find many dead bodies. And it's very symbolic on the one hand, and there's a very big tendency to kill. And personally, we are living and we're seeing death, a lot of death here in Colombia. So I think the Progressive International has to do things differently. We have to defend democracy. It's not only defending democracy as we live it or as we lived it some decades ago, but also its transformation. So social movements, society, and everyone should reclaim public power, because we don't have this power. And reclaiming this public power, we will be able to strengthen ourselves in order to plan. And we have to do it quickly because we only have 12 years left. And we can start with the fighting for life and against climate change. So this political expression of the expanding market, if we have a look at the economic sphere, what we can see is the capital logic, and we have to put limits to this logic so that life can exist. And we have to fight against barbarism. We have to destroy the tendency of destruction of democracy. And we also have to suggest the profundization of democracy all over the world and in Latin America. In Latin America, there's a lot of political tension, and I will finish with that. In Latin America, we can see a very ambivalent fight between progressive forces. Like 2 or 3 years ago, in Ecuador, Bolivia, we had a very different picture. Also in Argentina and Chile, where progressive powers could even win elections, and conservative powers won't, and fascist powers won't accept that. So they even turn to dictatorships in order to not permit that. So they are shooting against demonstrations or people in demonstrations. And this tension, this political tension that we're living in Latin America, and these progressive forces that we can see, how can they organize themselves in order to bring about change, which isn't based on oil, which isn't based on gas either, and which would be based on clean energies and would be based on humanity. So these progressive forces in Latin America, we hope that they will win. And we have to say that our fight doesn't mean that we want to distribute in another way the profit we make with all of these energies, but we have to change that. And that's where I finish. Okay, thank you very much, Gustavo. We want to express our solidarity with with people in Colombia, because of all what you're living in Colombia, and there's a lot of murder, there's a lot of repression. Now we will continue with the panel. We'd like to tell you that when you're watching this transmission, this live transmission, we've translation into English, Portuguese, and English. Now we can see he's here from Bolivia, and we want to welcome him. It's a great honor that he can be here with us. And there's Luis Arce, who is actually very occupied with his presidential campaign. Bolivian economy, when he was minister, was very, very successful. There was a lot of growth of about 4.5% annually. There was a lot of production, and many people could leave poverty. While in other countries there was increasing poverty, they could reduce poverty in Bolivia. Luis Arce, how can we achieve that Bolivian organizations can construct a democracy? Luis Arce, we think, will manage to generate well-being in Bolivia. We also confide that he will that he will manage to solve the crisis that we are living. Thank you very much for being here, and you've got the word. Thank you very much. I'm greeting you from Bolivia. I'm very occupied with my presidential campaign. There's very little time. I feel very honored to be able to be here. Thank you to the Progressive International. I'd also like to thank Juan Pablo, because he's the coordinator of this event. I'd also like to thank the other panelists, Gustavo Petro, Andrés Arauz, y Alicia Castro. I also greet you all. I also greet everyone who's listening to us from here, from Bolivia, from the heart of Latin America. I would like to talk about something very, very specific. Actually, here we are trying to reclaim democracy in Bolivia. As you all know, in November of last year, there was a coup here in Bolivia from the radical right and affiliated with neoliberal interests. So they entered the elections, and they tried to get rid of the left. I will talk about that later on. And it has been a fight, and we will go on fighting, and we will have elections in October in order to reclaim democracy in our country. As we know from the coup onwards, there has been a lot of political prosecution against politicians, against social movements, against my party, which is the Movement for Socialism. And this was also, of course, a violation of human rights, of the right of expression, of free expression. And we are living in a dictatorship, a very subtle dictatorship. It's not like in the 70s or before. We don't see militaries with their arms in the streets. but we do have this persecution, and we are objects of that. And the government, together with external forces, also with the help of the legal structure, is prosecuting political leaders and other important figures present. After the coup, what they do is they give the first date for elections, which is the 3rd of May. Actually, it's important because that it wasn't actually Mrs. Agnes. She was the vice president of the Senate, and after the coup by the right, she actually wouldn't have had to be in the position of president, and actually it would have been another person from our party. But in November of last year, from that point onwards, we've seen a lot of irregularities. So they say that the 3rd of March will be, we will see the elections. And this is what we want to talk about, because we think that they use that as a pretext. They use the pandemic as a pretext in order to not have elections. So they're moving the elections all the time. This happened when the current president wanted to have elections, and he designed a law so that they can change the date of the elections. There are still many doubts about coronavirus in Bolivia, and also the media kind of participate in that, because here they talk a lot about the deaths because of COVID and globally, so that people would be afraid, and that people also wouldn't want elections. And they also changed later on the date from August to September. And the Bolivian population didn't like that. And finally, they moved it to October. And they do that always with all the pretexts that they and the coronavirus is the best pretext that they could find. And actually, we were about to get to the highest point for the coronavirus. And the government kind of anticipated the climax of coronavirus here in Bolivia. And they used that in order to be able to change the date. And we can see that it wasn't right, it wasn't true. So they only use it as a pretext. And in our country, the right would like to have elections next year. And why? Because in Bolivia, during COVID, the government that we have, the current government, they've done a lot of corruption, nepotism. We've also seen an increase in drug trafficking. And this is what we've seen actually overall in in the area where the president comes from. So there has been an increase in drug trafficking in the last 10 months. So in Bolivia, we have this great contradiction that people want to have elections in order to have a democratic government, which is legal, which is legitimate, and which is elected, which could solve the problem of COVID, which could solve the problem of education, because the current government can't solve the problem of education. And there's a lot of necessity at the moment for pupils to continue having classes, for example. And in many other schools in Latin America, they try to continue with classes and with education, but here they don't. So the only thing they do is they read a letter from the government, and they only close down schools, but they do not really solve anything. So we've seen that the population wants to reclaim democracy, wants elections. They don't like the change that they're living, and they don't like changing the date of the elections. And you've probably seen in the media this type of movements, because actually in our neighbor countries actually know about that, I think, that the workers, all the agriculture workers, for example, organized in order to block streets, asking for legality, asking for fixed date of elections. They're asking for laws that guarantee a date for the elections. And here in Bolivia, we have international organisms in Bolivia, so that we can actually have these elections at the so these organizations together with they've tried to guarantee that we can have elections. So in many countries of Latin America, the right uses the legal system in order to accuse politicians that they want to accuse. And we want to show them that government is best when it governs for people and when it improves the life of people. And thinking things like from that point of view, what we've seen in Latin America is a lot of detentions, a lot of prosecution, and I think many countries live or will live these situations because they don't have any answers. They keep on thinking in neoliberalism, for example. But this is something that's changing within the world or throughout the world. So we need to think how to make sure that the right isn't going to have power again, because that's what they want. They want to reclaim power as well. And the progressive governments, which have first thought about the well-being of people and of society, and we have to remember that they've brought about a lot of development within these countries. They've helped the poorest people, and they've reduced poverty, extreme poverty. 38% of people were living in poverty, and we managed to reduce that. Reduce also the distance between rich and poor, in 2005, there was a huge gap between the rich and the poor, and we reduced that. Bolivia before that was also the most the most unjust country in Latin America, together with Brazil, and we've also changed it because now we are between the best. We've also managed to change distribution policies, and these elements, people won't forget that. People won't forget either that we increased production. In 2005, the production was much weaker, and we've increased production up to now. And this also influenced distribution. We've managed to improve the quality of life of people, their well-being. I'm economist, and I want to talk about how long people can live. And we've also managed that people now live much longer than before in the last 14 years. In 10 years only, we've managed that people can have a longer life, can have a better life. And we've increased it from 63 to 73. So all the people who believe that our government was a dictatorship, that the economy wasn't doing well, that that the media so all the people overall, the middle classes that believed all of that and believed what the media said, and they also kind of helped the coup. Now they feel bad about that because they realize that in our government people were doing much better. There was much more development, and now we are in the worst moment because we have disemployment rates of 12%. Last year it was last year it was on 4%, and now it's the triple. So actually we've managed to reduce a lot of numbers, and you can see now is that there's the Bolivian people can actually realize and reflect about all of that because they can see that. And they actually have a lot of clarity about that because they know that the only option that Bolivia has in order to improve the quality of life is the Movement for Socialism, is a government that first thinks about the Bolivians, that thinks about improving people's lives instead of hoping that political parties and governments instead of confiding in other governments which are not even thinking about people and which do not have even common objectives. They all have their individual programs, and the only objective they have in common is that we wouldn't be that we shouldn't be in the government. And the poor and the marginalized people also know how to govern, and they are actually the ones that can improve society. Because what we see now is that what we actually don't see any improvement. We can see that or we believe that the right will never forgive us for what we want to do. And we don't believe that they're the best that they're the best to run the government. The movement for socialism actually demonstrated that we can do something for Bolivian people, and we can see that the people support us because they see that this is what we were doing. So I'd like to tell you that it's very important that the journalists are here because we need them, international journalists, international institutions like you. You could also come to Bolivia in this electoral phase, and not only the day of the elections, but also beforehand, because there's a lot of things going wrong, and there's a lot of propaganda from the right. So they use whatever tool they can in order to reach their goal. And the institution that's organizing the elections, which is also linked to the president. It's an interim government, but we have a lot of doubts about transparency that this institution and the electoral institution might have, because it is linked to the government and to the president. So what we need more than ever, and that's why I'd like to ask you, who are journalists and are international and part of international organizations. For you, it's very important the democracy. For you, it's very important transparency. So I'd like that you could come to our country in order to observe what is going on. There are various journalists, for example, which have said that they face persecution, and not only them, but also their families, because the government doesn't want them to talk. And this is what we live in Bolivia, and that's why we need help from other places. We need people who can observe what's happening here, and we also need that people contribute to so that we can reclaim our democracy. We're in a panel where we talk about reclaiming democracy, and actually we are within this fight. We are having this fight at the moment in Bolivia, and we do understand that the ones who organized this panel, we understand that and we know that we all have to enter this fight. We all have to be committed with that, because things will change, and there will be a lot of change. So when we think about the Arab Spring and if we think about other countries in Latin America, we know that when the international context is different, when it's not a neoliberal context, when people like Trump start with policies of neo-protectionism, here in Latin America, and we felt very quiet. We did what we wanted to do, and they didn't like us. They didn't like that. So they started. So they started mingling with us, with our natural resources. And when they say, for example, and we will make coups where we want, that's when we see what they want to do in Latin America. And there we have to be strong, and we have to be together in Latin America. We have to defend our natural resources. And this also means defending democracy, and also defending the liberty to choose. And that we also have the liberty to choose what will be done with our natural resources, what will happen in our country. And I'm very happy that I had the chance to talk about that here live during the presidential campaign. For us, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to be campaigning and to have access to the media. You've seen that social media, which are also paid from outside. There's a lot of trolling, for example, because there are a lot of interests from outside, and they don't want a progressive government in Bolivia. And they know that the Movement for Socialism is the only political party which will guarantee that the natural resources won't be in the hands of transnationals. And we're the only ones that guarantee that the gas we have here and all the other natural resources won't be in transnational hands and in the hands of the empire. So this is the most important thing. There are two types of models for development, two types of models for government. One that people have already seen, and they've seen a lot of improvement, where there's a lot of participation in a multinational society where there's no discrimination. And there's another model which is neoliberal, where there's a lot of racism, where there's a lot of oppression. So these are the two models that people can decide between. And we do feel very sure about people, especially because they've seen what happens, that they won't get the decision wrong. And our movement is the base for economic development in our country. So I'd like to thank you for the time to share this experience. I give you a hug to everyone. And well, we will be in contact. We will be in contact. We will be listening now to our Argentinian friend. Thank you very much. Now we will have the opportunity to talk with everyone, because we're all here, and it's the Latin American panel. And we say hello and welcome to Rafael Correa, and welcome to the panel, Rafael. And now to continue the panel, Luis, do you tell us when you will have to go in order to continue campaigning? And thank you very much to you, to your party. Thank you very much to the international structures, to the activists which are supporting this fight. Hopefully the Bolivian society will vote for you so that you can win the elections. And well, we wish you a lot of strength, and well, it's important that you know that we are not alone, that you're not alone, and that we are with you. So I'll pass on to Claudia. Okay, and before we continue, Luis, in Europe and in the world, we are with you, we are with change, and we know that you will manage to reclaim democracy. We know that you've empowered all the Bolivians outside Bolivia, and we are very, very proud of you. And we will reclaim democracy. I only want to say, paraphrasing Lenin, when he finished one of his books, he said it's very beautiful to write about revolution, but it's more beautiful to be in a revolution. So now we do not only want to talk theoretically about that, but I'm at the point of being in a revolution. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. I don't have any words. Now we have here Andrés from Ecuador, the future president. We'll give the word to Andrés. Thank you very much, Claudia. First of all, I'd say sorry for the interruption, but I also liked listening to Luis. I'd also like to say hello to Rafael Correa, que es our leader. And I'd like to take up again and be a bit more direct. It's a very urgent situation. Friends from Progressive International. What Luis Arce said about Bolivia is also happening here in Ecuador. There are many threats against our electoral process. They've eliminated our political party. Fortunately, we acted beforehand and we connected with other party, and we will be in the election. They've also tried to make legal processes in order to make sure that Rafael Correa won't be able to participate in the elections. And they are also trying to inhibit that the Bolivian population can vote for us, and they want to prevent our participation. So this is very important to know for everyone, so that international organisms, that all our allies, international allies, can observe this process, and that they can also help us to avoid that they take away democracy in Ecuador. We have to do that. We have to fight for democracy in the streets, but also internationally, and with all the tools that we have in social media. So today we are not only in the neighborhood and in the mountains, but we're also using our cell phones in order to observe what's happening in Ecuador. Why does that happen? As Luis and Gustavo already said, when we do have a democracy in Latin America, in Ecuador, they know that we will be able to reclaim the future. We will be able to have opportunities and give opportunities to people in Latin America. We won't accept regression of our rights. We've already lived that. We've lived a time when there was a lot of democratic growth, and we would have much more human rights. And we could see that what a government that's really committed with the people can do. So with popular power, permanent popular power, and organized popular power, and conscious popular power, and conscious of the historic moment that we are living, we can reclaim the future. And we will be able to go ahead and transform Ecuador into real potential for raw material and for democracy. And now we're living we're living policies of death. That's what we suggest to Ecuador. Our constitution from 2008 and the current government has actually like caused a lot of damage in society, and they've tried to get rid of the idea of well-being. And we know that we want to construct this idea of well-being, of the buen vivir, so that people can have opportunities. As I've already said, we won't give up, and we won't give up on our human rights. And people in Ecuador, they are very, very conscious about that. So I'll tell all of you that the polls are saying that people are supporting, people are understanding what we talk about, and we're giving people a progressive alternative, and we hope that this will reflect itself in the elections. And we hope that the electoral institutions won't inhibit participation. We don't want to have any advantages, but we want to participate. Okay, we want, and we also want the Bolivian people to be able to decide what's going to happen, and that they can decide for a progressive option. I'd like to reflect a bit about democracy in the 21st century. It's a very important topic, and it's important that it's based on truth and information. Current democracy, which is based on the media, where the interaction between people isn't really there. So the media have a lot of power, and they control it up to a certain point. And we have to get rid of that, and we need a democracy which is based on the truth, with a lot of forms of expression, to have organic ways of doing things, and not having trolls which are sending false messages. We have to construct a real political practice of knowing where information and education are really democratic. If you think about that, how could you possibly make a decision if you don't have all the information you need, and if you have a constant misinformation coming from hegemonic media, which actually inhibit that people can have access to real information, that people can have access to truth, which are constantly for us. It's crucial constructing a new model of communication and promote new politics in education and culture and democratization of intellectual rights, democratization of the media. And fortunately, the technology will allow us to do that. If we think, for example, before we had only 5 TV channels, and now the technology allows us to have 100 channels, for example. So technology permits us to have to construct democratic structures and to have a real and more substantial democracy. Other important thing is, which has to do with democracy, which has to do with this decolonization. We have to have a multinational democracy, and this is a priority because Ecuador is a country which is plurinational, And we have to recognize this. We have to recognize the other. We have to construct dialogues. We have to get closer to our ancient knowledge, and also within this exchange of knowledge and experience, and we will construct a very rich democracy, and we will get much closer to this idea of well-being. But a real democracy isn't possible if we don't have economic equality. There won't be democracy if we have an elite which is in control of all the wealth that we have here, and they do not even invest it here, but they decide to take it outside the country, to have it like fictitious capital and Switzerland and Miami in other places. So for us, it's very important to have a real democracy, to have economic equality, a democratic economy, and where the money that comes from the people will be invested and will generate employment and will generate hope as well in the democratic process. And when the economic situation doesn't permit people to have opportunities, that's also when democracy gets much weaker. And our elites don't live this reality. They only want to maximize their profit, and they want to concentrate wealth, but they don't want to bring about a real project that has to do with improving social life and giving opportunities to society. And we're also threatened because of the Plan Condor. And if we can see that the dictatorships, that the military won't have popular support. So now, in order to get rid of democracy, they take up legal tools. We're talking the lawfare. So we're talking about the manipulation of legal structures in order to exclude progressive leaders from participating politically, from participating within other processes of society. And that's something that we're seeing now. We have to talk much more about that. We have to think about what that means for our political practice, and we have to fight for real democracy in our societies, and we have to fight against these threats globally. Finally, I'd like to conclude with some reflections about what Gustavo said about defending life and defending democracy. I agree completely with what he said, because this is the slogan, this is the necessity that we have, and this is what we should have as the most central aspect as Progressive International. We are living a moment where COVID has managed to show us all we need to see, and if you don't want to see, well, you won't see reality. But what we should learn from that, as being progressive forces and also as individuals, has to have to do with life and have to do with democracy. And this doesn't only have to do with political clarity, it also has to do with developing tools so that we can change how we think about development, how we think about human relations. And me gustaría decirles, si no cambiamos, if we don't change economic accountability, for example, we will make exploitation worse, and we will not really see reality as it is, and we cannot really protect human life and human rights. There's a lot of work before us. I hope that this first big meeting of the Progressive International will help us to to have very clear which are our challenges and what we need in order to transform our reality. And I think that democracy always has to serve the majorities, and that's what will happen from next year onwards in Ecuador. Thank you very much, Andres. We'd like to tell you that when we suggested this meeting to talk about Latin America, one of the objectives was to help and to support movements in Latin America. And we know that Andres and Luis are of the best men to construct other futures. And they have all our support, and we feel very inspired by what you've said. And you have all the support of the Progressive International for your campaign and for your project, and we feel very, very honored being able to support you and being able to accompany you in your fight. In order to close, we have here Elisa Castro. For the ones who don't know her, she's political activist, she's trade union activist. She was in an airline trades union. She was ambassador in Venezuela and also in Great Britain. And she's also part of the Progressive International. And I'm very pleased that you're here in order to tell us about what you think about international solidarity, about the work that we've been doing. And we'd like to thank you, all of us, all the work that you've done with respect to communication. We want to thank the translators. So Alicia, we'd like to ask you to close this panel. You've got the word. Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. I was thinking that to have this meeting within the COVID crisis and have all the leaders here and to have activists here and to have militants here and have all the social movement here, it's really important. And I think it's something that can help us to see which can be our future plan, which can be this plan that helps us to construct a common narrative and to have a common organization, to have an international campaign, which can really put into practice local campaigns, national campaigns. Our meeting, we have our meeting here in a very critic moment and a very special moment. And Chomsky, a couple of hours ago, I think many of you will have listened to him. He talked about a terminal crisis or about the possibility of it being a terminal crisis. We have nuclear war. We have a catastrophe which has to do with the climate. And we here in Latin America in the last decade, there have been a lot of initiatives, very important, that might help us to get to a participative democracy, a popular democracy, and revolutionary democracy. But all of this is kind of frozen at the moment. So as Chomsky said, our future depends on how we can actually continue fighting and if we can do that. COVID has to do with two things. It has to do with a complete destruction of economic structures. If we think about economic, political, and military structures, and if we think that United States, which can't solve the crisis, and we realize that capitalism is in a very big crisis and it's actually in a very bad moment. We know that COVID and is something new, but inequality isn't. I'm here in Buenos Aires, which is one of the cities which has most budget in Latin America. But there are parts where we don't have energy, where we don't have water, where people can't go to their classes. And this is something that didn't start with COVID, but COVID does show us how deep this crisis is. Our region is one of the region that lives most inequality. With even though we are living COVID, there are a lot of millionaires which are generated every day, and they pay less taxes than all the labor forces. And this is something that happens in the United States. And it's very important to know that, because it also has to do with the crisis of capitalism, because we know that there's some who would like to reconstruct capitalism after this corona crisis. And we have another problem, um, which is that many things that we've managed to achieve in the last years, and they will try to return them or to turn them back. There will be millions of people that are now part of middle class will go back to being poor, and there are people who are now poor that will live even worse. As Progressive International, we should talk and construct justice, international justice, and we need also fiscal tax justice. It's an ethic imperative that people who have more should pay more. So here in Argentine, we want to discuss this, and it's important that we are talking, for example, about having more taxes for people who gain more, and we also want to have a tax for all the businesses which have gained with COVID, which has to do with pharmaceutical industry, which has to do with technology. There's the necessity to not have people not pay taxes, and we're also talking about the packages of salvation that the governments have given to businesses. And the important thing is that this money is given to people who need it, and not people who are not paying taxes or who are actually already having enough money. As we already know, because it's discussing in all the world, in all the world, they're discussing about what happens to the debt of countries that can't pay them. What about working hours? There are many topics, and I think we should organize these suggestions. We have to present them. We have to present them as a common, as a united group. I think it's a good moment to decide collectively. I think during this time of COVID, we've shown that we have the capacity to decide collectively and to decide the decision to be inside, to be in quarantine in order to take care of ourselves and of others. How can they tell us that we weren't able to decide collectively? In Latin America, we're suffering a very important change. There's Andrés Arauz talked about that. We are living a Plan Condor 2. In the last decade, we enjoyed the regional unity in Latin America, and when we were having different leaderships, which your microphone is switched off. We're having a technical problem again. We will wait a minute. Okay, go on, Alicia. I was talking about all the leaders that we had here in Latin America, and it was the first time that we had presidents who were similar to the people that were governing. We had an indigenous president. We had a president who was from the working class. So we were kind of recuperating our ideals. And there were two basic elements for that were important for our people, which is independence and unity. And without unity, we can't improve economy, we can't have social justice. And not that long ago, in 2011, we managed to construct a community of Caribbean and Latin American countries. First of all, we managed to generate relations within countries. We managed to avoid a police coup. And there were some forces that managed to do a coup in Bolivia. We also managed to create the Bank of the South, and we've had a lot of projects that would have helped us with sovereignty. And in 2005, we were talking against ALCA, and this has to do with one of the strongest resistances that the United States has lived. And we managed to bring about changes, very, very important infrastructural changes. And I don't know if we were prepared for what was going to come. We've heard it before that there's been a lot of manipulation of legal structures. There has been a parliamentary coup in Brazil. Then there was a legal process against Lula, and he was kind of banned from electoral structures. And this was an experiment. And afterwards, they did the same in Bolivia con Evo Morales. And afterwards, they do that, and now they are doing that in Ecuador. But with enthusiasm, with political commitment, I hope and I confide that we will be able to recuperate the government in Bolivia and in Ecuador. And here in Argentina, we have a Bolivian community which is very big, and which is Linera, for example, who is at the moment in Argentina. And our love for Bolivia, for Ecuador, and all the love we have for these countries is very strong, and we're thinking a lot about them. This was the Latin America that we dreamed of, and as Luis Arce said, this is something that we keep in our memory. This moment of recognition, this moment of unity, this moment when we could be ourselves, when we could be Latin America with our ideas, with our ideals. And Simón Rodriguez, which was the teacher of Simón Bolívar, Latin America doesn't have to copy, it has to be original. And that's where we are now, and we are in the Progressive International in order to create. Luis Arce said that we've been kind of a target for United States because they of course want to appropriate themselves of our resources. And now again, they are looking towards Latin America. As Gustavo Petro said, they've turned the Mediterranean in a big graveyard for all the people who had to flee from wars in their countries. Today, Venezuela lives a very difficult situation. In Brazil, in Brazil, in the border between Brazil and Venezuela, we live a very difficult situation. And what is happening is they want to demonize politicians who want to bring about a change. There's a lot of persecution. They try to organize parallel governments, which one example is, for example, Agnes. They want to block the currencies in different countries, and that's what they've done to Venezuela. That's what they've had done to Cuba earlier. And finally, they want to have different reasons and resources and bases in order to be able to intervene militarily within our countries. Because obviously, when we are threatened, every one of us is threatened. I'd like to say something to and about Raphael. I think he's still here. For him seeking, I would like to talk about political asylum of Julian Assange. I was very close to that because at that time I was ambassador in London. So I saw him 2 days after having come to London, and it's very paradoxical. It's a paradox because while all of us are trying to kind of distinguish false information and lies that media have always constructed, obviously, and because that is their nature to a certain extent, and they're also kind of constructing the political reality we live. And they also kind of help the people who are threatening democracies. And there's a segmentation of information, for example, and this is a very powerful weapon. And not only an anti-democratic weapon, but also a weapon of that help with a coup, for example. So that's why it's very important today the topic of communication, and to have to change policies of communication. Also we have to think about that here in the Progressive International. We need a media of popular communication in order to fight against this the media which is supporting conventional powers and corporations. And now Julian Assange, who with WikiLeaks helped us understand how the world works, who talked about to us about many other things. He is detained in a high security prison, and they threaten him to send him back to the United States, where he will send him to 55 years of prison. And why? Because of having said the truth about what's happening in the United States, telling us the truth about our communities, about our peoples, and about our governments. We need a plan. We need a global campaign. We need a common vision for post-capitalism. Yarosfaki, in another conference, told us that capitalism and the capitalism is threatening our future and is threatening life. And we need a new social contract, a new economic contract, and we need a new ecological agreement in order for us to be able to rescue the planet and the life we find there. Our success, and that's something that Naomi Klein said. She said that there won't be a new normality because we are in a destroyed planet, and we have to talk about reparation. And it's a very interesting concept because our success can't be measured with economic progress, but with reparation. So start a process of reparation with happiness that's linked to happiness. And actually, I'd like to finish talking about this happiness. And I'd like to invite you, and I'd like also to thank you, so that the next Congress in 2021 can be in the island of the Sur in the South Atlantic. Our members of the Progressive International in Argentina would like to invite you to Argentina for the next Congress, and it will be in Ushuaia, which is the city which is part of a province which is bicontinental, and because it's also, so we would like to invite you for next year to this city in Argentina. Will it be a Congress where we will see Luis Arce as president of Bolivia and Andrés Arauz as president of Ecuador, or will it be a Congress of the end of the world? And if you accept our invitation, I think it will be a Congress where we will be able to, from a point in the south, and look towards the north and make the south north. And we will change perspectives, and we will change also relations. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alicia, for your for what you've said, for your invitation. We've come to the point where we have to come to an end of this conference, this first international meeting, Internationalism or Extinction. I'm very pleased to have exchanged ideas with you. Thank you very much, Gustavo Petro. Thank you very much, Andrés Arauz, Alicia Castro, Claudia also. You're all invited to participate within in our movement, and you can have a look at our website. I'd like to ask you that everyone is doing that with number 1. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everyone. The 18th of October, we will start to reclaim democracy, starting with Bolivia. And well, hopefully that all the socialists and communists in the world will help Bolivia to fight.